Good afternoon. Hope everyone's doing well. We are diving into the nervous system, which is why I'm holding models here, and I'm going to have a bunch of models and things to show you. First, I want to talk about our module, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the nervous system and the brain. So I have a few models here that I'll share with you. Here's a skull with a brain in it, and then I have half a brain here because the other half sitting over there that I'll talk through as well. So we'll talk about some of these things because we're going to dive into the nervous system, and we have 3 weeks basically to work on the nervous system. So this is week 9, and just kind of an overview module, and it's going to be a lot of reading and watching videos, honestly. So what I highly advise you do in this first week of the nervous system is really take your time going through the content and using your study guide to take notes. Okay, this first week's going to walk you through the basic structure and function of the nervous system and looking at the central nervous system versus the peripheral nervous system and some of those functions. And then you're going to dive further into the peripheral nervous system and in the next week. And then the last week, we're going to dive into special senses and kind of wrapping up the nervous system as we head into the end of the quarter. And then you'll be diving into 242 in January and looking at the brain again as you study the endocrine system. So it's never ending in anatomy physiology, and it all kind of starts to, from this point on, I feel like it all really starts to blend together, which is helpful because we're going to talk about the brain and the nervous system throughout the rest of basically all of A&P because it's highly interconnected. So if you look at the module here on your screen for week 9, you'll see I have the outline up top, and I've really made the outline very detailed. So make sure you focus on the outline and not everything that's in OpenStax, because OpenStax goes way more in depth than we will cover. I've really pared it down to what I think is the most important aspects that this course needs to know, especially for nursing, okay, and other allied health areas. You'll see I have a couple PowerPoints on there. If you want to use those or look through those, you can. I have the sequence of reading and activities as usual. You'll notice there's a lot of videos and readings. Again, use that study guide, take thorough notes, take your time, reach out to me as you need help. And then you have a nervous system lab activity, the organization and anatomy of the nervous system. In here, you're going to start by looking at the basic organization of the nervous system, central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, and break that down. And then you're going to look at specific histology. So you're going to look at slides of tissue, nervous system tissue, starting with the central nervous system. You're going to take a spinal cord cross section, and I have a link specifically to that slide so you don't have to search it. And then you're going to dive into the parts of the brain and look at their structure and function. And the other thing you want to get started, it's not due till December 4th, so you got a few weeks, is the team patient case study number 4. You'll want to make sure you get started on that and look at the issue at hand. It has to do around oligodendrocytes, which are a type of glial cell in the central nervous system, and you'll want to make sure you pay attention to that. And then you have some more reading to do, and you'll end with a lobster simulation called sensory transduction, which dives into basically how information is transmitted back through the nervous system or through neurons to the brain and processed, and you'll get to dive into the anatomy and the physiology of the nervous system. So it'll be a good lab to end the week on as you head into week 10. Okay, so we are in week 9, and I will adjust the due date on this. It says November 22nd, but we will make sure it's November 23rd, so it'll be due on the Monday. So I really want you to spend the early part of this week just reading, watching videos, and taking notes. And please reach out to me if you have questions on content. I want to make sure you understand material and are able to be ready for that end of module assessment and really ready to go into 242, because there's a lot of building blocks in nervous system that you need to know as you head into 242. So let's talk a little bit. So when we talk about the nervous system, you can talk about basic organization, and the basic way to look at it is the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. There is another one that people will bring up, the enteric nervous system, but that's really an extension of the peripheral nervous system. But it's really important these days in research and health because they found that the enteric nervous system is what basically feeds information from our gut, and so like our digestive system, our stomach, our small intestines, large intestines, back to our brain, and vice versa. And what they're finding is right, our bacterial flora, so the bacteria in our stomach and gut, actually can create chemicals that signal to our enteric nervous system, that signal back to our brain, that impact our ability to function. Okay, it impacts our mood, it impacts our dopamine and serotonin levels. So, and then our bacterial flora can be impacted based on medications, nutrition, and other supplements that we might take. And therefore, your diet is highly influential on your brain function. Okay, purely because what you eat can impact what bacteria are living, or what medicines you take, etc., are living inside your gut. And then those bacteria can then create signals to our enteric nervous system, which can then cause things to change in our central nervous system. And there's a ton of research around that these days, and it's something to really consider as you eat food each day and exercise and those things, because it has such a bigger role than just your, we always talk about heart healthy, but it's everything, brain healthy, and you want to make sure you take care of those things. All right, so right here we have the spinal cord. Now we do have some peripheral nervous system on here, but when we talk about the spinal cord, which is, if we look inside here, you can see the spinal cord. If I pull the C1 here up off the CT, although they're kind of combined here, but I'm pulling the cervical vertebrae apart so you can see in here, and you can see that spinal cord right there. Okay, that is a part of the central nervous system. So the spinal cord and the brain make up your central nervous system. Now these spinal nerves that are coming out here, these yellow nerves that are coming out, okay, in between your vertebrae, these intravertebral foramen, they call them, right? These right here are part of the peripheral nervous system, okay? And this is where information is going out and coming in to the spinal cord. All right, and you have what we call dorsal root ganglion and dorsal roots and ventral roots, okay? And that information is part of the information that is coming back to the spinal cord and out the spinal cord. Okay, your ventral root is what we call the motor neurons. Those are the signals going out to the body. The dorsal roots have the sensory or afferent information that's coming back to the spinal cords. Ignore the reminder there, sorry. So those are part of the peripheral nervous system that picks up all the information in your body and brings it back to the central nervous system. But then also we send information out, and that goes out the motor part of your peripheral nervous system as well, or the somatic, that goes to the body to perform actions, right? To make changes, adjust to situations, to maintain homeostasis, whatever it may be. Okay, so spinal cord, part of your central nervous system. The nerves that come off the spinal cord to the body, or the information that comes back via spinal nerves, or these nerves or peripheral nerves, is part of the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so there we go. Now, brain, right? Here's our skull, here's our brain. Normally that spinal cord comes up through here, so you can see it cut in half right there. If I zoom in, okay, that's your spinal cord. That's part of your central nervous system. Now we can take this brain out. Okay, took it out of the skull here. All right, and we have some different components, right? Your spinal cord comes up, all right, and becomes your brainstem. Okay, your brainstem is highly important, and when you get into 242, you're going to learn more about it. But right away, when your brainstem comes up, you hit the medulla oblongata. Now, for those who have famously watched The Waterboy, you've heard the word medulla oblongata. If you haven't watched Waterboy, you better look up Waterboy medulla oblongata scene, because Adam Sandler tackles basically Colonel Sanders over his disagreement with the professor on what the medulla oblongata does versus why he thinks alligators get angry. So if you haven't seen that movie, check it out, because there's something wrong with his medulla oblongata. Now, the medulla oblongata in the human brain is a very important component in heart rate and respiratory rate. All right, and you'll learn more about that in 242 around what its role is. As you go up the medulla, or up the brainstem past the medulla oblongata, you hit the pons. Okay, and the pons also play a significant role in these basic functions, especially respiration. Okay, which is why if you fall and hit your brainstem and damage your brainstem or sever your brainstem, in little ways, you can die immediately, because you impact the ability of your brain to control your heart and breathing. Okay, so those are important things to think about. Now, this is actually a model that we recently got that has injuries to the brain. Okay, but the cool thing about this is it actually shows the layers as well. So this layer right here is the dura mater that help cover the brain, and it connects to the skull. So normally this would sit, the skull would connect right here to the dura mater, and there's actually a space in the dura mater called the subdural space, kind of like a little cavity in there where there's fluid, part to help maintain your balance in your head, and cushion and nutrient exchange, which we'll learn more about. Now, underneath the dura mater, you would actually find the arachnoid mater and then the pia mater. Pia mater is like a thin, translucent layer across the actual brain tissue. And the arachnoid mater is kind of a spider web looking thing, which is why it's called arachnoid, between the pia mater and the dura mater. Now, this red area right here that is showing, this is actually what would be caused, or it's the result of a stroke. So this is a damaged brain, and that's from a stroke, and that's from a stroke as well. Okay, and that's where you've had damage to the brain because you haven't had good blood flow right to the brain from a stroke. There's some sort of blockage. Okay, now I can also open this brain up. Hopefully it doesn't fall apart on me. Right, we can see the inside here, but this brain has actually been sliced open to show different diseases. Okay, so this one right here, I slice it open and look at it, and this area right here represents, this is what happens when you have Alzheimer's, and it's these enlarged ventricles, which we'll talk about. But it's enlarged ventricles where there's cerebrospinal fluid, and that's an effect of Alzheimer's disease. Okay. Now you also have some other areas in here, like this is a tumor right here, and it's in the temporal lobe. Okay. And I'm looking down to look at my notes because there's a lot of different things in here. I want to make sure I tell you what's right. You won't be tested on this, but I'm just showing you how these different lesions and injuries can show up in the brain for different diseases. And this is right here is lesions in the white matter of the brain that is part of multiple sclerosis, or MS, where the white matter, the myelin in the white matter is damaged or it's attacked and broken down, which is why this looks different than the yellowish there. It's not white matter anymore because it's been damaged, and so that's kind of a lesion from multiple sclerosis, which is an autoimmune disorder where your immune system actually attacks your myelin, basically, which is what creates the white matter. Okay, which you'll learn about in this. All right, so those are some injuries there that can show up in a brain. Now this brain's a little easier to handle here. Okay. And we can talk about some structures here. Okay. Now the top part of your brain here, what we think of as the brain, okay, this hemisphere is called the cerebrum. But inside here, there's a lot going on. Okay. You have this cauliflower-y looking structure in the back, which is your cerebellum. And your cerebellum is highly important. If I can get this thing to get back to where it's supposed to be. There we go. Cerebellum is highly important. It's a big part of balance and maintaining, kind of knowing where things are. And there's a variety of other functions you'll dive into. I'm not going to list them all out now because you'll get overwhelmed with them. But we got the brainstem coming up here. So you have your medulla oblongata down here, your pons here, okay? And it moves up into this area, which is your thalamus, okay? And then you have your hypothalamus, and you would have your pituitary gland down here, that it doesn't really show it super well here. But the pituitary gland is a huge part of your hormone function in your body. And then on the back, you have your pineal gland, which if anybody's ever taken melatonin at night, that's what the pineal gland makes in order to have our clocks working so we know when to sleep and when to wake up. The pineal gland is a big part of that. These little white area right here, these little bumps, they're called the corpora quadrigemina, and they actually are a big reason why when something makes a sound, you actually know where that sound came from. So they're able to actually help you dictate where that sound came from. Okay, right above the thalamus here is the corpus callosum, and this is where your hemisphere is actually part of one of the areas your hemispheres actually connect. And they believe women actually have more connections in here. We call them nerve tracts that connect the two sides of the brain. And that's what allows, they say, women to be better or they believe women to be better multitaskers than men because of their ability to have the right and left hemispheres of their brain have more connections than men. Now, if we take this open, okay, you can actually see the space in here, okay, and this is a lateral ventricle, which you'll learn about. All right, the lateral ventricles are part of the area where our cerebral spinal fluid circulates. Okay, so we have blood that comes into the outer layers of the brain, and we have a blood-brain barrier, so the blood can't go straight into the tissue because we don't want diseases getting into our brain tissue. So we have this barrier that keeps out infectious diseases. But the nutrients are able to get pushed across into these ventricles where the cerebral spinal fluid circulates through the tissue to allow for our cells in our brain to get the necessary nutrients. So you have lateral ventricles on each side, and then we have a system that allows it to drain down to what we call the third ventricle and the fourth ventricle, and there's a cerebral aqueduct in here. And some of those things are a little harder to see. But the main thing is that cerebral spinal fluid is able to move through the brain and provide the nutrients, but also maintain the correct pressure as well. And so when you get hydrocephalus, you get too much of that, and you actually get swelling in the skull and pressure on the brain, and that causes brain damage. Okay, so central nervous system, the brain, the spinal cord, peripheral nervous system, I don't have great models for, but it involves everything outside of the spinal cord and the brain that basically provides actions or brings back sensory information. All right, this has been your intro video for week 9 nervous system. We'll have more. You'll get tired of seeing the brain over the next 3 weeks, but I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you're doing well. And as usual, please reach out to me and get the help you need if you have questions. Take care.